Hi Anil, thank you for accepting my invitation to talk about your first book, the Bitcoin Handbook. I've got here. Ping!
Hi, Levent. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. And, you were part of the team that recently created the Italian version of it. So, I'm very grateful and happy to speak to you.
Before we start, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself to those who don't know who you are yet.
I'm just a average Bitcoiner who liked visual explanations. I liked making it easy for others to understand Bitcoin. And so it really just started as putting together some sketches, putting it out into the world. And fortunately, there were other people who also found those resources useful. I've been creating educational material maybe 5 years now. And through that, I've gotten to meet a lot of fantastic Bitcoiners. I've gotten to invest in a number of Bitcoin startups. And as you mentioned, I recently put out a book as a compilation of a lot of my work.
Fun fact, I discovered your book while watching an Instagram story from Miro Liponi. There was his son Milo, I call it Milo Nakamoto, that was playing with your book. So I say, what was that? I see all this graphic, this color, this stuff. So I bought it. The book is divided in three parts: the economic, technology and system, and the psychological one, right? Why this,
Exactly.
this division?
So over the years, I had just been collecting these concepts or mental models, frameworks, whatever you want to call them. When it got to a point where I had enough to maybe put them into a book, you're always thinking about how is someone going to consume it or read it, and how can you organize those ideas in a way that makes the most sense. As I started trying to group them into different buckets or containers, those were the, overarching topics that just made the most sense. When you look at Bitcoin, it covers so many different fields, from mathematics to the conversion of energy to philosophy. So it could have been done many different ways, but this was the way that made sense and would be most helpful to the reader.
I had the honor of working on the creation of the Italian version of the Bitcoin Handbook. We call it Il Vademecum Bitcoin for Consensus Network. I worked with Guybrush, one of the two voices of the Bitcoin Italia podcast, and Virginia Dorsey. It's a very special book. How did the idea of creating a book on Bitcoin and making like this came about?
As you probably know, Bitcoiners will tell you what they think. They will tell you when you're right. They'll tell you when you're wrong. But most importantly, Bitcoiners will support you if you're trying to help educate others. That's something that everyone can get on the same team in terms of that mission. I started writing a newsletter where each week I would try to explain one concept. Over time, I kept going and going. It got to a point where enough people were asking me, hey, a newsletter is great, but I'd really like something physical to hold in my hand. Do you know that Bitcoiners love their books? They love collecting books. It reached a point where I had enough material that it could actually become a book. And again, I have no experience publishing a book. I have no business publishing a book, but fortunately there are Bitcoiners out there running publishing companies now in Consensus Network who reached out and said, hey, we can help. And they did. Then a number of translators like yourself said, hey, you know what, let's keep going. Let's spread the message even further into a number of native languages. So did not expect it, did not plan it, but yeah, here we are.
Who is this book for?
It was, I wrote it for myself. I have a couple of young kids, very short on time. There are so many different concepts that are helpful to understand when you're learning about Bitcoin or just even the wider world. But it's hard to keep 50 different concepts alive, rattling around in your head at all times. That's just, there's not enough memory in my brain. It was just forcing myself to go through the process of trying to explain each concept by writing. I think writing is a great way to see where there are holes in your logic or your thinking, look for gaps. And so going through that process was just my own way of solidifying information, because other people had told me they wanted a book, but I also needed a resource that I could keep going back to as I'm listening to other Bitcoin podcasts or reading other books or watching documentaries. So yeah, I really wrote it for myself, but fortunately I'm a very average, ordinary person, and there are lots of other people out there like me.
This is a special book. Let me explain a little bit. I found very easy to understand hard stuff. We can call it like this, okay? 2 pages, 3 pages. No more. This is not a standard Bitcoin book like the Bitcoin Standard, or Mastering Bitcoin, etc., etc. What do you think about it?
There's a lot of fantastic Bitcoin books already out there. Like you mentioned, the Bitcoin Standard, if you want a history of money, mastering Bitcoin, if you want to understand the technical side of how the Bitcoin protocol works. It was kind of thinking what gaps are left in the Bitcoin library, what else is missing. And for me, this book was the result of thinking about that. How can you take these complex, sometimes intimidating or scary concepts and make it digestible and simple that even my grandparents could understand? Because at the end of the day, I really want the people I love and care about to understand the current monetary system and maybe how that's working against people or to their disadvantage, and also how Bitcoin maybe solves some of that. Everyone has the ability to understand Bitcoin. It just has to be explained in the right way or in a way that's relevant to them. I really just tried to cut out anything that was confusing or anything that was maybe overly technical. The end result was something that's pretty short. It's less than I think 100 pages, but I hope that it's dense enough that you can walk away thinking, okay, I learned something important or meaningful.
Was there any chapter more difficult to develop than other, perhaps for the graphics or the concept you have to explain?
I'm not an overly technical person. When it comes to explaining something like thermodynamics, I really had to start from zero and speak to people much smarter than I am, try to communicate that in a way that anyone could understand. The areas around technology and systems, that was challenging for me. But luckily, Bitcoiners are very generous with their time. And if you're patient, they'll take as much time as is needed to explain concepts to you. So,
would you call yourself a Bitcoin maximalist?
Yeah, I would for the time being, but I don't think in the future that term will exist, in the same way that there are no steel maximalists or electricity maximalists. It's not so much maximalism as it is the process of elimination of looking at, okay, here are all the available options. What's the best solution to this problem? It's more looking at it as an engineering problem than any kind of, what's the word? But I think you get it.
Let me know what struck you the most of Bitcoin, about Bitcoin.
Alabama is people like you. It's just how quickly humans can find a very strong bond over a common cause, as simple as we can all prosper by choosing a money where no single individual has the ability to manipulate it. And then we believe that right should be extended out to friends, family, our community. And so it's being part of this grassroots movement that just keeps growing and growing. We're all in it together.
What is your vision about Bitcoin in 10 years?
I don't make price predictions ever. I don't have a crystal ball. I guess my hope for Bitcoin is that right now I see the greatest threat to people or Bitcoiners is governments acting more and more irrationally. That might be dangerous for Bitcoiners in the future, depending on where you live and how extreme a government gets in terms of needing control over the money supply. So my hope is that enough work is done by us in the next 10 years that it's a fairly smooth transition, that enough governments around the world will understand this can't be stopped. It's very transparent. It's something that's going to hold governments accountable, and it's in the best interest of people. I'm just really hoping there's no massive overreaction from certain governments.
You live in Canada right now. What's the situation about Bitcoin, the government, the people? Can you explain me the frame?
I've been in Canada for about 10 years now. And before that, I lived in Australia. I think they're very similar countries in terms of culture, how their economy is developed, and in terms of what the main support or drivers are of the economy, in terms of being natural resources, international students who come to study. But they both have done something fairly irresponsible over the last maybe 5 to 7 years. That is, they've increased the supply of money and increased their national debt massively relative to other developed nations, Western nations. It just seems very unsustainable. You see it in day-to-day life. I know inflation's a big topic of conversation everywhere, but Canada and Australia for the last 20 years, they've been able to maybe patch over any, potential realities by having a housing boom, pumping up immigration. They've been pulling all the levers possible to delay economic reality for a long time. So the populations in Australia and Canada, especially younger generations, this is catching them by surprise. There can be a situation in which they are worse off than their parents. Feels like there's a lot of resentment that is bubbling up. I hope that Bitcoin has a greater adoption here because of that. So we'll see.
And what's your vision of Anil in 10 years?
It's a good question, Alavad. Honestly, I don't know. I hope to keep doing what I'm doing, which is just creating educational material within Bitcoin. I hope to keep connecting with Bitcoiners like yourself. Hopefully, more and more people can see through the issues caused by central banking and be receptive to Bitcoin as a solution, and our jobs get easier.
Without going 10 years ahead, let's talk about the nearest future. Do you have some project coming out or stuff you want to talk about it?
Yeah, there's actually a project that's just come out I got to work on, which was a lot of fun and a great experience for me. And if you're familiar with Parker Lewis, so he wrote a series of essays over 2018, 2019, and 2020 called Gradually, Then Suddenly. And it's about 16 or 17 long essays that covered a range of topics. This collection of essays, it's been credited by a lot of people like Michael Saylor, Russ Stevens, for helping them to understand Bitcoin. I've been working with Parker for about a year, actually, previously, to turn these essays into a book. That book is now finally being published. You can order it right now from Safedian's online store. I think it's just a great addition to the Bitcoin library. I think it's just one of those books that will really stand up to, the Bitcoin standard or Broken Money as like this iconic book you can pass around and gift to friends that will very clearly break down a lot of the arguments or misconceptions that maybe average people have against Bitcoin. It's nice to see that finally.
I know that some presenters are hungry for slides because they hate to do that,
Yeah, it's... Yeah, you either like making the slides or you like presenting. It's rare that someone likes to do both. I don't mind making the slides, so if you're giving a talk, please take them.
Do you have a favorite chapter?
Yeah, but the one that I think is most useful or helpful for people to understand, it's one of the psychological concepts. I think it might be even at the very end of the book, and it's called Gell-Mann amnesia. It's named after a physicist called Murray Gell-Mann, but his name's not so much important. The idea is around how you can filter the information you consume, especially from the media or mainstream media. And the general idea is, let's say, Alavand, you're an expert in aviation, in aircraft, and you pick up a major newspaper and the article is about some new Airbus model that's being designed, and you can see for yourself, because of your own expertise, that there are major errors in how they've reported it or major biases or things they've overlooked. Basically, it doesn't pass your own test. They haven't done the work, and you can see that. And then you turn the page to a story about, let's say, a new drug is being developed, and you don't have any expertise in that area, but you read it as though the article must be completely accurate. So it's the idea of, if you can see some bullshit in one aspect of which you're an expert, you should almost disregard all other information coming from that particular source, because you don't know if it's accurate or not. And, Bitcoiners know this concept really, really well, because you see how journalists report on Bitcoin and how much time it takes to genuinely understand Bitcoin deeply. Many journalists who are assigned to write a story about Bitcoin rarely have that depth of knowledge. That's why I don't really read any major newspapers anymore. It applies to all media, right? All formats. And that's the great thing about becoming a Bitcoiner, is you've become a Bitcoiner in spite of all those forces working against you. And you've had to do the work yourself by understanding all these first principle concepts. It gives you just a better filter for what you allow to get through to you versus, what you just tune out.
Yeah, there is the specter of the fiat standard out there.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah.
How long did the book take to write?
As I mentioned, it started as a newsletter. Writing that newsletter every week for about a year. I already had like a draft, but then I would say it took another 6 months to rework it into a format that might work for a book. And again, at first it was released just as an ebook. I didn't even think it would become a physical book. So there was a little bit of work to be done, again, changing it from a digital book to a physical book. Overall, if anyone out there is thinking of writing a Bitcoin book, do it. Absolutely do it. Because if I can do it, honestly, anyone can do it. You know, the barriers have become so low now. You know, if you just open up a Google Doc, start typing away, and if there's something there, a publisher or a Bitcoin publishing house will take it and try and spread the word.
I see a slide about Nostr. What do you think about it?
So I'm not as active on Nostr as I maybe should be. You probably have seen that there's a huge overlap between Bitcoiners and people utilizing the Nostr protocol. And I think it just comes from this desire to be sovereign, to not be at risk of censorship, to have the freedom to express yourself without any kind of repercussions from a centralized platform. It's just a fascinating development. Maybe the thing that most surprised me was how seamless Lightning has been integrated into how people are using the Nostr protocol right now to communicate, because I don't post there very often at all, but I have an NPub and it's linked to my GetAlbi account, and people zap me every now and then for various reasons. In terms of changing the economics of social media, I think it's got some really, really interesting implications.
From how long you are on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In terms of when I first heard about Bitcoin, it's more than 10 years ago until I actually understood Bitcoin. It was a pretty decent gap. And I think that's, a similar experience for most Bitcoiners is the first time you hear about it, you might think, oh, this is interesting. That's interesting. Okay. And then you go back to your regular life. And it's only until Bitcoin keeps repeatedly hitting you in the face that you then take the time. Yeah. In terms of being kind of full-time Bitcoin, maybe around 5 years now. I still consider myself a novice. I'm still learning. There's still a lot about Bitcoin I wish I knew.
We talk about community, and in the book you talk about the network effect. Do you think that there is a network effect in the Bitcoin community that is like an engine for people to discover this world and to grow up with them?
Yes, I mean, you're the perfect example of this, right? Like, you picked up my book, decided to create an Italian translation for that. And by doing so, you've now opened the door to every native Italian speaker, potentially in the future, right? These kind of events are happening all over the world amongst many different Bitcoiners. And I think anyone who is curious and puts in the time to understand Bitcoin will see it as a better option than the current system. So it's really just is, in my mind, are the number and quality of educational resources increasing? Because if that's happening, people will naturally find Bitcoin eventually. Nobody wants to have less purchasing power in the future. The number of Bitcoiners growing, we benefit from having more potential trading partners and more value creators in the same economy using a common currency that is Bitcoin. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, community translates into the number of users translates into holders, which, incentivizes miners. It's all interconnected, but at the end of the day, there are humans behind it all come to life.
How can people find you online, on the social media and stuff?
I'm most accessible via Twitter. If you want to get in touch with me, you can always send me a DM via Twitter. My handle is Anil Said So. But other than that, there is a link in the bio of my Twitter account, and that'll send you to basically another website that has all of the educational materials I've ever made that you can download for free. I make a lot of slides that people can use in their own presentations or put into their own newsletters. There's probably close to between 700 and 1,000 in total. Go and take them, steal them, use them as you please, help other people understand Bitcoin. But those are the two main places.
Anil, it was a great chat. Thank you. And guys, buy the book, the Bitcoin Handbook or the Vademecum Bitcoin. I hope to have you back there soon.
Yeah. Elevan, thanks again for creating an Italian resource that's just honestly is fantastic. It blows my mind that it exists. And thank you for the invitation. Yeah, Italian Bitcoiners, there's something special about you guys. There's just a huge amount of humility and excitement. And I would love to make it over for a conference one day. So
it's an awesome
thanks
community.
again.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.